Excuses sound harmless until you realize they are quietly stealing your life. They dress up as reasons, as bad luck, as not the right time. But in reality, they are the permission slips we write to stay weak. Winners see the same obstacles you see, feel the same fear you feel, carry the same doubts you carry. The difference is they refuse to bow to them. While others are busy explaining why they can't, winners are already moving, already adapting, already finding a way. So, if you're waiting for perfect conditions, for confidence, for someone to push you, you'll be waiting forever. The moment you stop making excuses is the exact moment you become dangerous to your limitations, because now nothing owns you anymore. Not your past, not your fear, not even your comfort. Excuses are seductive because they make you feel safe. They wrap you in a story where none of this is your fault, where the world is unfair, where the timing is wrong, where the resources aren't there, where people didn't support you enough. And for a moment, that story feels good. It protects your pride. It shields you from the sting of responsibility. But comfort is expensive. It quietly charges you your potential, your progress, and eventually your self-respect. Growth, on the other hand, feels harsh at first. It asks you to look in the mirror without flinching. It asks you to admit that maybe you could have tried harder, prepared better, stayed longer, learned more. That's not easy. But that's where power begins. Winners understand something most people avoid. Discomfort is not a warning sign, it's a training ground. When things get difficult, they don't rush to find a soft place to land. They lean in. They let the pressure expose their weaknesses so they can strengthen them. While others are negotiating with reality, winners are adjusting to it. They don't waste energy wishing it were easier. They become tougher. Because deep down, they know comfort never built strength, never built courage, never built anything worth having. Everything solid is forged under heat, under tension, under resistance. There comes a moment when you realize that every excuse you make is a decision to stay the same. Not because you can't move forward, but because staying where you are feels familiar. Familiar can feel safe, even when it's slowly suffocating you. Growth requires stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. It requires risking failure, embarrassment, and the possibility that you might have to start over. But winners accept that price because they fear stagnation more than they fear struggle. They would rather fall while moving forward than stand still pretending to be comfortable. And the truth is, no one hands you growth. No one arrives to drag you out of your comfort zone. It is a choice you make in quiet moments, when no one is watching, when it would be easier to delay, to justify, to promise yourself you'll start tomorrow. Winners close that gap between intention and action. They move before they feel ready. They act before confidence shows up. Over time, those small acts of courage compound, and the person who once relied on excuses becomes someone who relies on discipline. So, if you feel resistance right now, if something inside you is telling you to wait, to hesitate, to stay where it's predictable, that's the exact signal to move. Comfort will keep you alive, but growth will make you formidable. One keeps you safe, the other makes you unstoppable. And you don't get both. Accountability is uncomfortable because it removes every place you used to hide. It strips away the ability to blame circumstances, other people, or bad timing, and places the responsibility back where it belongs, in your hands. Most people resist that feeling because it's heavy. It forces you to confront the gap between who you say you want to be and what you actually do every day. But the moment you accept that weight instead of running from it, something shifts. You stop waiting for things to change, and you start changing things yourself. That's when accountability stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like control. When you hold yourself accountable, you no longer depend on motivation, praise, or supervision to move forward. You become self-directed. You do the work whether you feel like it or not, whether anyone notices or not, whether the results are immediate or not. That level of ownership is rare, and it's powerful because it makes you reliable, not to others, but to yourself. You begin to trust your own word. When you say you'll do something, it gets done. That quiet confidence builds, not from talent or luck, but from repeated proof that you can rely on yourself in difficult moments. There will be times when accountability forces you to admit hard truths, that you wasted time, that you avoided something out of fear, that you chose comfort when you needed discipline. Those realizations can sting, but they also free you. Because once you stop lying to yourself, you eliminate confusion. You see the situation clearly, and clarity is what allows decisive action. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you start asking, "What am I going to do about it?" That question alone separates people who stay stuck from those who move forward. Accountability also changes how you experience failure. It stops being something that crushes you and becomes something that instructs you. When you own your mistakes, you can study them, adjust, and return stronger. You're no longer fragile because your progress isn't tied to being perfect. It's tied to being responsible. You understand that setbacks are not the end of the story unless you refuse to learn from them. That mindset turns obstacles into training instead of proof that you should quit. At some point, you realize accountability is not a burden placed on you by others. It's a standard you choose for yourself. It's the decision to live intentionally instead of reactively, to lead yourself instead of waiting to be led. And once you experience the strength that comes from that level of ownership, excuses lose their appeal. Because you've discovered something far more powerful than comfort. You've discovered that your life responds directly to the standards you enforce, and when you raise those standards, everything else has to rise with them. Motivation is a fleeting emotion. It arrives when conditions feel right, when the energy is high, when the vision of the outcome is exciting enough to pull you forward. But it disappears just as quickly when reality becomes repetitive, difficult, or inconvenient. If you rely on motivation, you will always be negotiating with your feelings, always waiting for the right mood to show up before you take action. Discipline doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask how you feel. It operates on a decision that was made long before the moment of resistance arrived. That's why discipline is quieter, less glamorous, but infinitely more reliable. There are days when you will wake up tired, distracted, or discouraged, and those are the days that define you. Anyone can perform when they feel strong. Anyone can push forward when the path is clear and the rewards are visible. But discipline shows itself when the work is boring, when progress feels invisible, when the effort seems disproportionate to the results. In those moments, discipline becomes a form of self-respect. It says, "I do this because I said I would, not because I feel like it." That consistency builds a foundation that emotions alone could never sustain. Over time, discipline begins to change your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries when it's convenient and start seeing yourself as someone who executes, regardless of circumstance. That shift is subtle but powerful. It removes the drama from effort. Work is no longer a question, it's a routine. You don't waste energy deciding whether to act. You act, and then you move on. This is where real momentum is created, not through bursts of inspiration, but through steady, repeated action that compounds day after day. Discipline also protects you from the traps that derail most people. It shields you from procrastination disguised as preparation, from distractions disguised as rest, from doubt disguised as caution. When your standards are clear, you don't need to debate with yourself every time something difficult appears. The answer is already decided. That clarity reduces friction in your life, allowing you to move faster and with more certainty while others are still hesitating. Eventually, the results begin to speak. Not loudly at first, but unmistakably. Small improvements accumulate, skills sharpen, confidence becomes grounded in evidence rather than hope. And you realize that motivation was never the engine. It was only the spark. Discipline was the fuel that kept you moving long after the initial excitement faded. When you reach that point, you no longer fear losing motivation because you've built something stronger. You've built a system within yourself that carries you forward, whether you feel inspired or not, and that is what makes progress inevitable. Pressure has a way of stripping away the image you carefully present to the world and exposing what's underneath. When everything is comfortable, you can pretend to be disciplined, brave, patient, focused. But when the stakes rise, when the clock is ticking, when the outcome actually matters, there's no room left for performance. You don't rise to your expectations in those moments. You fall to the level of your preparation. Pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it. It shows whether you built your confidence on real habits or empty words. Most people try to avoid pressure because it feels overwhelming. It magnifies doubt, accelerates fear, and forces decisions without the luxury of overthinking. But avoiding pressure also means avoiding the chance to discover what you're capable of. The people who grow the most are not the ones who seek comfort, but the ones who deliberately place themselves in situations where the outcome is uncertain. They understand that pressure is a teacher. It exposes weak points that comfort keeps hidden. It forces you to adapt, to sharpen, to become more than you were before the moment arrived. Under pressure, your instincts take over. If you trained yourself to stay calm, you will find clarity. If you trained yourself to panic, you will freeze. That's why small daily disciplines matter more than dramatic bursts of effort. In critical moments, you won't have time to invent courage or manufacture focus. You will default to what you practiced repeatedly. Pressure is not the time to figure out who you want to be. It's the time when you meet who you already are. And if you don't like that version, the work must happen long before the next test arrives. There is also a strange clarity that comes with pressure. It eliminates distractions and forces you to focus only on what truly matters. Petty concerns disappear. Excuses lose their relevance. You become fully present because there is no other option. In that intensity, you often discover strength you didn't know you had, solutions you didn't see before, resilience that only surfaces when retreat is no longer acceptable. Pressure compresses time and forces growth that might have taken years under easier conditions. If you learn to face pressure instead of fleeing from it, it becomes less of an enemy and more of an ally. You start to recognize it as a signal that you are operating at a level where things matter, where the outcome has weight, where your actions carry consequences. That realization changes your relationship with difficulty. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to think, "This is where I prove who I am." And once you adopt that mindset, pressure stops being something that breaks you and becomes something that defines you. Your life quietly organizes itself around what you tolerate. Not what you say you want, not what you hope will happen, but what you accept as normal every single day. If you tolerate lateness, inconsistency, and half-effort, that becomes your baseline. If you tolerate negative environments, draining conversations, and habits that weaken you, they become part of your identity without you even noticing. Standards are not loud declarations. They are quiet boundaries. They determine what you allow into your time, your mind, and your life. And once something becomes acceptable to you, it stops feeling wrong, even if it's holding you back. Raising your standards is uncomfortable because it forces change immediately. It might mean saying no where you used to say yes. It might mean walking away from situations that once felt familiar. It might mean demanding more from yourself when it would be easier to relax into old patterns. People around you may not understand it at first because your new standards disrupt the roles they were used to you playing. Growth often looks like distance to those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. But standards are not about pleasing others. They are about respecting your own direction. When your standards rise, your decisions become clearer. You no longer debate whether to do what's necessary. You simply do it because anything less would violate the line you've drawn for yourself. You stop negotiating with distractions. Stop rationalizing poor choices. Stop lowering the bar to match your mood. That clarity saves enormous energy. Instead of constantly deciding between comfort and progress, the decision has already been made. You act in alignment with who you chose to become, not who you used to be. High standards also reshape how you see setbacks. You don't interpret them as signals to quit, but as indicators that something needs to improve. You refine your approach, strengthen your skills, adjust your habits, and move forward with more precision. Mediocrity becomes harder to tolerate because you've experienced what it feels like to operate at a higher level. The gap between your potential and your actions becomes more visible, and that awareness pushes you to close it instead of ignoring it. Over time, the results compound in ways that seem almost invisible at first. Opportunities appear because you're prepared for them. Trust builds because people see consistency in you. Confidence grows because it's supported by evidence, not wishful thinking. You become someone who doesn't wait for life to improve, but actively shapes it through the standards you refuse to lower. And eventually, you realize your future was never determined by luck or circumstances alone. It was determined by the level you decided was non-negotiable. Once that level rises, everything else has no choice but to follow. Fear has a language, but most people never learn how to interpret it. They feel the rush of discomfort, the tightening in the chest, the urge to step back, and they assume it means stop. But fear is not always a warning of danger. Often, it is a signal that you are standing at the edge of growth. It appears when you are about to do something unfamiliar, something that stretches your identity beyond what feels safe and predictable. If you treat every fear response as a command to retreat, you confine yourself to a life that never expands. The goal is not to eliminate fear, but to understand what it's trying to tell you. Sometimes fear points to a lack of preparation. It highlights the areas where your confidence has no foundation yet. In those cases, the answer is not avoidance, but training. You build skill, you gather knowledge, you expose yourself gradually until what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Other times, fear is simply the mind reacting to uncertainty, trying to protect you from embarrassment, failure, or rejection, things that are uncomfortable but not fatal. Learning to distinguish between real danger and imagined risk is a critical shift. One protects your safety, the other protects your comfort, and those are not the same thing. When you start treating fear as information, you become curious instead of paralyzed. You ask, "What exactly am I afraid of?" And the answer often reveals something deeper than the surface emotion. Maybe it's the fear of being judged, of losing control, of discovering that you're capable of more and can no longer hide behind excuses. That awareness gives you leverage. You can address the root instead of running from the feeling. Fear loses much of its power when it's examined closely, because clarity replaces the vague sense of dread that once seemed overwhelming. There is also a form of strength that only develops by moving forward while fear is present. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. Each time you act, despite hesitation, you teach your mind that discomfort is survivable. The next challenge feels slightly less intimidating, not because it changed, but because you did. Over time, the situations that once stopped you become situations you can handle, then eventually situations you can lead others through. What was once a barrier becomes evidence of your growth. If you wait to feel fearless before you act, you will wait forever. Fear rarely disappears on its own. It fades through exposure and experience. The path forward is not about silencing that inner alarm, but about walking with it without letting it control your direction. When you learn to do that, fear transforms from a prison into a compass. It starts pointing toward the areas of your life that hold the most potential, the places where effort will change you the most. And once you see it that way, fear stops being the thing that blocks your path and becomes the thing that shows you exactly where to go. Words can create the illusion of progress without requiring any real movement. You can talk about your plans, explain your delays, justify your choices, and for a moment it feels productive, as if saying it somehow counts as doing it. But execution is the only language results understand. The more time you spend explaining why something hasn't happened yet, the less time you spend making it happen. Winners don't waste energy crafting convincing stories about their circumstances. They redirect that energy into action. Because at the end of the day, explanations don't change outcomes. Execution does. There is a subtle comfort in explaining yourself. It softens judgment, buys sympathy, and protects your image from the harsh reality of unfinished work. But it also keeps you stuck in a cycle where talking replaces doing. The longer you stay in that cycle, the harder it becomes to break it, because you start believing your own reasons. Execution, on the other hand, is uncomfortable because it exposes you to possible failure. Once you act, the outcome becomes real, measurable, visible. There is no hiding behind intention anymore. That vulnerability is exactly why so many people delay action and retreat into endless explanation. When you shift your focus from explaining to executing, your mindset changes immediately. You stop asking for permission, stop seeking validation, stop waiting for perfect conditions. You begin working with what you have, where you are, in the moment you're in. Progress may be slow at first, imperfect, even messy, but it's real. And real progress builds confidence far faster than polished excuses ever could. Each completed task, each small win, reinforces the belief that movement matters more than justification. Execution also simplifies your life. It eliminates overthinking because the question is no longer, "Why can't I?" but "What's the next step?" You stop carrying the mental weight of unfinished intentions and start replacing it with the momentum of completed actions. That momentum becomes addictive in the best way. Once you experience how powerful consistent execution feels, excuses lose their appeal. Talking about success becomes far less satisfying than actually building it. Over time, people notice the shift, not because you announce it, but because results begin to appear where there used to be promises. Your reputation changes from someone who has potential to someone who delivers. More importantly, your relationship with yourself changes. You develop a quiet confidence rooted in evidence, not hope. You trust that when something needs to be done, you will handle it. And that trust frees you from the need to explain yourself at all. Because when your actions speak consistently, words become unnecessary. Resilience doesn't appear when life is easy. It isn't developed in comfort, routine, or predictability. It is built in the moments you would rather escape, when plans fall apart, when effort goes unnoticed, when the outcome you hoped for doesn't arrive. Those are the moments that test whether you will bend or break. Most people misunderstand resilience as something you either have or you don't. But it is actually something you train, like a muscle that only grows when it is pushed beyond its usual limits. Every difficult experience you endure without giving up adds another layer of strength that comfort could never provide. Uncomfortable moments force you to confront parts of yourself you don't see when things are going well. Your patience, your emotional control, your ability to stay focused when distractions would be easier. All of it gets exposed. You learn how you react to disappointment, how you carry frustration, how quickly you recover when something goes wrong. At first, those reactions may not be what you want them to be. You may realize you get discouraged faster than you thought, or that setbacks affect you more deeply than you expected. But awareness is the beginning of resilience, because you cannot strengthen what you refuse to acknowledge. There is also a quiet endurance that develops when you keep moving through discomfort without immediate reward. You begin to understand that progress is not always visible and that effort does not always produce instant results. That understanding protects you from the urge to quit too soon. You stop measuring your growth only by outcomes and start valuing the process itself, the discipline to continue, the willingness to adapt, the patience to let improvement unfold over time. This shift makes you harder to shake because your commitment is no longer tied to how quickly things change. Resilience also changes your relationship with failure. Instead of seeing it as a verdict on your ability, you start seeing it as a phase in your development. You extract lessons instead of carrying regret. You return to the challenge with more knowledge, more strategy, more control. Each recovery makes the next setback less intimidating because you have proof that you can withstand difficulty and still move forward. What once felt like the end begins to feel like part of the path. Eventually, you reach a point where uncomfortable moments no longer surprise you. You expect resistance, you anticipate obstacles, and you trust your capacity to handle them. That confidence is not loud or dramatic. It is steady and grounded. You know that no matter what happens, you will adapt, endure, and continue. And that is the real power of resilience. Not that it prevents hardship, but that it ensures hardship does not stop you. No one is coming to save you. That's a truth most people resist because it feels isolating at first. We're wired to hope for guidance, support, someone to intervene when the weight of responsibility becomes too heavy. But waiting for that intervention is a trap. Life doesn't pause for anyone. Opportunities won't wait, challenges won't soften, and the clock keeps moving forward whether you act or not. The people you admire, the ones who accomplish extraordinary things, didn't wait for permission or rescue. They moved first and figured out the rest along the way. That is what separates those who succeed from those who stagnate. Self-reliance is not about arrogance, it's about clarity and urgency. When you stop expecting someone to rescue you, you start seeing your own power. You realize that the tools, knowledge, and resilience you need are already within reach if you're willing to act. Waiting for someone else to fix your problems only delays your growth, because it keeps you in a reactive mindset. The moment you take responsibility and move anyway, you shift into a proactive mode, where you create solutions instead of hoping for them. Action is the antidote to helplessness. Moving when no one is coming also sharpens courage. Every decision you make alone, every risk you take without a safety net, strengthens your ability to face uncertainty. Fear may still be present, but it becomes manageable because you've trained yourself to act despite it. You begin to trust that you can handle what comes, even without backup. That trust is powerful because it removes dependency and builds confidence that no external circumstance can shake. Once you know you can move without help, the pressure of others' opinions or expectations loses its control over you. There's also a freedom in realizing no one is coming. It forces clarity. What do you really want, and how badly do you want it? When the safety net disappears, excuses vanish with it. You can no longer blame timing, people, or luck. There's only one option left. Do it, figure it out, move forward. That realization is uncomfortable, yes, but it is liberating. It cuts away illusions of reliance and exposes the raw truth that your life is in your hands, and waiting for someone else is a choice you can no longer afford.